It's a grain that has a starch that you can convert to a fermentable sugar. We've tried to make beer out of it, right? We have a building just across the parking lot that's got a whole bunch of different silos in there, each holding a different variety of malt. In the different varieties, you're going to find basically more and more roasting. So they're going to start out kind of golden and go all the way up through burnt, right? With all those levels of caramelization in the middle. So the brewer, they sit downstairs, they got an office with a big touchscreen computer. They press the right buttons, it weighs out the malts that they need, and then they come across a pipe bridge from the malt building into the brew house, and they enter the building right here, right? So it floods this first thing up, this thing. It's a wet mill, right? So it fills it with dry grain. This back tank gets full of hot water. It comes and kind of floods that. And for the next few minutes, the grain and the water steep together. The grain's really dried out. If it went through the mill, which is two big crushing rollers, right? Dry, it would crush to a powder. We don't really want that, so we get it wet first. That way when it goes to the mill, it just cracks open. It exposes all the flavor and all the color, and most importantly, the sugar that's on the inside of that grain. So get it wet, we crack it open, and push it here to the mash tun. The mash tun's like the big tea kettle, right? More hot water gets added. It stews in there about 70 to 75 degrees Celsius for about an hour or an hour and a half. What we're doing there is basically brewing this sweet barley tea. We're cooking out the flavor, the sugar, and the color, right? And then as that happens, it turns out to look a little bit like overhydrated oatmeal, right? Not super appetizing at that point. But then it pushes over to the lauter tun, the next one over. German word, it means big fancy colander. At least that's what I assume it means. I don't actually speak German. Yeah. But it's a big fancy colander. The grain stays on top, and that sweet barley tea that we just brewed in the mash tun comes dripping out of the bottom. That sweet barley tea is now called wort, spelled W-O-R-T. Drips out, and it fills the next tank over, which is just kind of staging it, applying a little heat, keeping it warm, getting it ready for the boil, right? And then the last tank, that's the boil kettle. It differs from the boil kettle in brew house 2 by how we warm it, right? So in brew house 1, we take 100 barrels and we put a heat source underneath it. It takes about an hour and a half to create a rolling boil through 3,100 gallons. Well, brew house 2 has the Merlin boil kettle. It's called the Merlin boil kettle because there's this cone in there on the very top, kind of looks like a wizard's hat, right? So the Merlin boil kettle. That wort gets fountained up and spritzed across in thin sheets. That cone's heated up to about 130 degrees Celsius, so we can actually boil 6,200 gallons of wort in just 45 minutes. Pretty impressive, yeah. And then the wort at that point, it's very sweet, right? It would be like you soak frosted flakes in warm water. And so you add hops to it. Hops are a bittering agent. They create balance, or like in the case of Ranger IPA, a nice hoppy beer by cooking out the alpha acids, or what makes a hop bitter, right? And then any spicing that the beer might have, like Sunshine Wheat. It has orange peel and coriander. That goes in during the boil as well. And then it pushes through a chiller. Once that's done, brings it down to a more hospitable temperature for the yeast, and then it's sent over to the cellar for fermentation. This whole process, end to end, from blowing grain in to pushing wort out, is roughly 4 hours. But once it hits the lauter tun, we can then blow in grain for the next batch. So they can kind of piggyback across all day long, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, about 360 days a year. They get a few major holidays and such off. But generally speaking, those brewers are in here making beer.